Hello BookTube. Today I'm going to be doing the Generally Speaking book tag. This tag was created by Criminali and I saw it on his channel. I'm also going to be referencing Steve Donahue's version of this tag because I also had the idea to enter all of the prompts with nonfiction books. So I'll leave a link to both Criminali's original video as well as Steve Donahue's version in the show notes down below. Prompt number 1. A horrifying book that isn't horror. For this prompt, I'm going to go with Strongmen by Ruth Ben-Ghiat. Strongmen is a history of authoritarianism in the 20th century and into the 21st century. The book looks at a number of authoritarian dictators, starting with Benito Mussolini and continuing on with Adolf Hitler, Francisco Franco, Augusto Pinochet, Muammar Gaddafi, Vladimir Putin, Silvio Berlusconi, Donald Trump, although he never quite became a dictator, Jair Bolsonaro, who again never quite became a dictator. Neither did Silvio Berlusconi, but they're authoritarian, democratically elected authoritarians, so they count. So the book is divided into a number of parts. How these authoritarians came into power, what they did while they were in power, and how they eventually lost power. And each section is kind of split into looking at these various dictators or authoritarian leaders, split into roughly 3 time periods with some overlap. And the first phase is the fascistic dictators, Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler, and then in the second, with Francisco Franco as a sort of a bridge dictator. He was both a fascist and a military dictator, to more strictly military dictators, in which Ben-Ghiat focuses on Muammar Gaddafi and Augusto Pinochet, and then the elected autocrats or the elected authoritarians, primarily with Silvio Berlusconi and Vladimir Putin, but Donald Trump and then Jair Bolsonaro, Recep Erdogan, Rodrigo Duterte, and Viktor Orban and others kind of appear here and there, as do other dictators. Strongmen is especially terrifying and horrifying, not only in how these men come to power, how they subvert the democratic process for the most part, to install themselves as dictators, or increasingly dictatorial, for those who haven't completely gone dictator, but also for the sort of Gorn or the sort of the more cringe aspects of horror, the sort of the physical horror. The sections featuring Chile under the rule of Pinochet and Libya under Gaddafi, those are horrifying. Particularly Pinochet, it is just horrifying, the torture that opponents or perceived opponents of Pinochet's regime went through, and also, Gaddafi's as well. So that's horrifying. Prompt number 2 is a book with a terrible crime that isn't a crime novel. For this prompt, I'm going with Dictatorland by Paul Kenyon. This is a book about African dictators in the 20th century, how they came to power, what they did while they were in power, how they maintained power, how much they plundered while they were in power, and how some of them lost power. most of the dictators featured lost power eventually or naturally died in some cases, but quite a few of them are still around. And Dictatorland especially focuses on how these various dictators plundered their countries for decades, amassing ridiculous amounts of unimaginable amounts of money, and how they hid it and that sort of thing. I mean, to be honest, both the Dictatorland and Strongmen could be switched around because there's quite a few horrifying things in Dictatorland. I mean, what some of these dictators did to maintain power, again, are quite horrifying. And what's going on, particularly, like, say, Eritrea, rather horrifying as well. And then a lot of the dictators and authoritarian leaders from Strongmen are, again, pilfering their countries blind to the extent that they can, or can get away with. So, go either way. But I thought Dictatorland does focus a bit more on the crime, so I went with Dictatorland for prompt number 2. Anyway, let's move on to prompt number 3. A book about love that isn't a romance. For this prompt, I'm going with Maria Theresa by Barbara Stollberg-Rilinger. It's a biography of Maria Theresa, who was Austrian empress in the mid to late 18th century, and one of the most endearing things about her is her the love story with Francis Stephen, her husband, who eventually became Holy Roman Emperor before his death. And it's just, that relationship is wonderfully explored in Maria Theresa. Prompt number 4. A book with a puzzle that isn't a mystery. So this prompt gave me some problems, and perhaps my answer is a bit of a cheat. But if you consider literature, or like fiction, poetry, drama, as interpretive puzzles, then maybe a book with a key to the puzzle might be appropriate. So for this prompt, I'm going to answer with a work of literary theory. And I'll focus on the one work of literary theory that I still have in my possession, and that is Anatomy of Criticism by Northrop Frye. So what Anatomy of Criticism does is I guess you could call it genre theory or genre criticism. It looks at sort of the tropes and archetypes that compose the various genres of literature, and enumerates what they have and what their interpretive meanings are. Of course, Frye's theory has long since fallen out of fashion, if it ever actually was in much fashion. But it is the only one I have, and that's literary theory. Largely probably because I can't get rid of it. It's an old book. Prompt number 5. A book with magic that isn't a fantasy. Now, for this prompt, I'm a bit annoyed with Steve Donahue because he actually answered the same answer I had, which is Magic by Chris Gosden. It's a history of magic from the Stone Age to kinda sort of the present, although that is a bit variable. Largely the present means Western Europe. And then other parts of the world, the coverage gets cut off a few thousand years ago. Namely, the Chinese chapter, or the chapter on Chinese magic, or Asian magic, largely stopped with, I think, the Han Dynasty, if not the Qin Dynasty. But I mean, it is a very interesting, thought-provoking book. I would also go with The Witch by Ronald Hutton, which is a history of the witch in primarily Western Europe, although he does touch around the world at points. Also a good book if you're interested in the history of magic. Excuse me. Prompt number 6. A book that thrilled you that wasn't a thriller. For this prompt, I'm going with Catch and Kill by Ronan Farrow, which is probably about as real-life a thriller as you can get. Catch and Kill is Ronan Farrow's I don't think you could call it a memoir. I guess but it's not quite his reporting. It's more of sort of the story of how he first became aware of the accusations against Harvey Weinstein, his sort of cultivation of a number of sources for to accusers and the corroborating evidence of how, and also of other powerful people, of how Ronan Farrow's initial reporting for NBC News was scuttled by Matt Lauer, or at least in part by Matt Lauer and others, and how eventually Ronan Farrow took the story to the New Yorker and how it launched there, and it's really thrilling potboiler of a book. So I will go with that for my answer for prompt number 6. Prompt number 7. A book with science that isn't science fiction. For this prompt, I'm going to answer with a book of science, and that is A Brilliant Abyss by Helen Scales. It's her exploration of the depths of the ocean, the history of how the depths were studied, what's down there, the science of what's down there, the environmental threat to the depths, that sort of thing. It's a really fascinating book. Quite enjoyed it. So that was the Generally Speaking tag. If you would like to do this tag, consider yourselves tagged, and I will see you probably in a few minutes with another tag video, because there are quite a few interesting tags that have come up this past week, and I missed them because of various reasons, which if I have time to talk about on Friday, I will talk about on Friday. So until I see you next book tip, thank you, have a great afternoon, and stay safe.